All right.
This is recording. Now we're streaming. And the final thing's recording. And here we go.
You should prove an interesting challenge. Possibly the most interesting to come through that door in many years.
What do you want?
Why, you, of course. Picard. Jean-Luc. Serial number SP-937-215. Son of Maurice and Yvette Picard. Born in Le Bar, France. Formerly captain of the Stargazer, where you conducted extensive studies on Theta Bam's subspace carrier waves. Don't look so surprised. How could we have designed a lure for the captain of the Federation flagship unless we knew something about his background?
So you concocted an elaborate ruse to bring me here. Why?
In this room, you do not ask questions. I ask them. You answer. If I am not satisfied with your answers, you will die.
You will die, Joe. You're going to die. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the How Original Podcast for our Sunday Reviews episode. Last time we were watching Stargate Atlantis, and we were not able to talk about the idea of torture. We left off on that. So Joe and I decided to open up this one with one of the most memorable Star Trek episodes that is called Chains of Command. That clip you just heard was from part 1, but we're primarily going to look at part 2, which deals with Captain Jean-Luc Picard being tortured by the Cardassians. Hello, Joe, and welcome back.
Hello, Kyle.
Well, that's a grim opening, isn't it?
It was a grim opening, but I felt it summed up what we're going to be talking about here with this episode 2, Change in Direction.
Yeah, I completely agree. So to give people some background, let me read this is the plot summary of part 1 of Chain of Command. And for reference, this is, looks like season 6, episode 10 and 11. But so for part 1, we have Picard, Worf, and Dr. Crusher are reassigned from the Enterprise to a secret mission. Meanwhile, the Enterprise is under the command of Captain Edward Jellicoe, who immediately starts changes, much to the dismay of the crew. So we're not going to focus on that one so much unless we run out of time. I'm going to turn myself up here a little bit. But then we're actually going to look at part 2, and that summary is Captain Picard's secret mission fails. Spoiler alert, leading him to being captured by Cardassians. As he is tortured by his captors, Captain Jellicoe and the Enterprise attempt to prevent war with the Cardassian Union. Wow. Okay, so we were already into the thick of it. How many times were the Cardassians in Star Trek before this point? Not many, right?
Yeah, this is actually the first appearance of their military casts uniforms that we see all throughout Deep Space Nine.
Wow.
Well, I was going to say this actually, part 1 was the teleplay was written, and I think part 2 also by Ronald Moore. And this is the last episode of Next Generation before the premiere of Deep Space Nine. So.
Oh, really? I didn't realize that. That's cool.
Yeah, this is a bridging. Them pulling out of Bajoran space in sort of the background of this torture story is integral to them leaving Deep Space Nine to begin with and having the Federation move in. So.
I did not know those were a crossover episode. That's pretty cool. But see, look what I learned on the show already. This is why people need to listen, because where else are you going to learn this stuff? Not on your own. So,
spoiler alert, by the way, I love that we had to do a spoiler alert from 1992.
Well, that plot summary kind of gave it all away. I mean, the mission went awry. I didn't expect that to happen. Come on. But no, so let's get into the thick of it, because this is kind of a very deep and dark subject. So we start off, Picard, like we said, Picard, Beverly, and Worf go and they try to, there's a metagenic weapon. So that's a biological warfare weapon that's going to destroy all DNA on planets, making it super easy for the Cardassians to come in and just take over all the pre-existing infrastructure and have no alien life to deal with. So Picard, as an expert on, what was it, transphasic or something like that?
Theta bands, I believe. Yeah.
Theta band stuff, subspace waves. He is lured to this planet. The Cardassians don't actually have anything going on there that we really know about or find out about, and it's just a trap. So Beverly and Worf get away. They go back to the Enterprise, and Picard gets to spend some real quality time with a lovely Gaul from the Cardassian Union.
Well, and I mean, this episode we're going to talk about really, well, there's two storylines going on, and we may be doing a disservice addressing Captain Jellicoe, who, speaking beforehand with you, I mentioned he's a bit of a trivia question for Star Trek fans because he's one of the few people that were not a regular captain to record a captain's log. So he's the answer to a trivia question. But his relationship with Captain Riker, or Commander Riker, excuse me, promoting him out of turn.
Wasn't that the whole point of his episode, Jellicoe? You're not going to be a captain anytime soon.
Yeah, he gets into a fight with Riker basically right off the bat, doesn't like him, and in no uncertain terms says he's not qualified to be a Starfleet officer, let alone a captain. And then he ends up crawling back to him later. But we may be doing that a disservice because that's really an interesting piece to this whole two-part episode, because some of Captain Jellicoe's decisions and some of the ways he does things have long-lasting implications on the Enterprise. But this episode of torture only really came about because of two factors. They needed to do this story with the Cardassians setting up Deep Space Nine, but there were extreme budget problems during this year. So to kind of flesh out the budget, they said, well, why don't we make this a two-parter? And we'll basically have this short two-man play between Gul Madred and Jean-Luc. And we'll stretch out this episode. We'll put no money in part two. It's going to be two men in a room. So there's no special effects. There's no phaser fire. There's no quantum torpedoes and things of that nature. And lo and behold, it basically makes the list of some of the top best episodes of Star Trek ever repeatedly. I think Entertainment Weekly said it was number 10 in the top 10 best episodes.
And I think you said this earlier, but I mean, you really see how amazing of an actor Patrick Stewart is, to be in this room with one other actor and to have this be such quality television that, it holds up however many years later. It is an amazingly intense scene every time the two of them are together. And I think it cracks a standard barrier you see in a lot of TV shows with torture. A lot of them kind of do the hokey Hollywood thing, but you really get some deep psychology and reactions, and it kind of goes to show this isn't your finger breaking or anything like that that you get on your superhero shows or stuff like that. This is your actual true bending of wills, if you know.
Yeah, I think in your standard TV fare, your run-of-the-mill TV shows that don't shoot for this level of quality, at least this episode shoots for. There's sort of a couple different ways torture shows go or torture episodes go. There's either the hero that's so strong he can't possibly be broken and he holds the information regardless of the electricity running through his toes or what have you, or there's sort of the the hero's able to break this morally weak and corruptible human being that's going to do this reprehensible thing, and then they're able to fly in at the last minute, defuse the bomb with 3 seconds left on the timer, and everybody lives.
Right, let's look at Deadpool as always. I mean, simple torture. There you go. I had to throw a Deadpool reference in somehow. It just seemed fitting.
We should make sure to mention Deadpool every single episode from here on out.
I am for that. But let's steer into the darkness here. Let's steer away from our jovial torture. Because, there is that. Do we want to jump into the second clip here already, or do you want to hold that for a bit later?
Well, I think we can go ahead and start to listen to it. I think that first clip sets up, there's definitely an impending doom sense when Gul Madred basically addresses Picard, lets him know that everything was set in motion to lure him here. And they're basically after defense plans for Minos Corvo. And that's the reason they bring Picard in, because he's captain of the Enterprise, the lead ship, the flagship. He may be knowledgeable about these defensive strategy plans. So the question becomes, can you let us know what's going on? So I guess we can kind of set the clip up a little bit.
Let's roll it. So to be clear, our first clip was from part 1 of this two-parter, and this one is very early on in part 2. Here we go.
Wasted energy, Captain. You might come to wish you hadn't expended it in such a futile effort.
Torture is expressly forbidden under the terms of the Saldonis IV Convention governing the treatment of prisoners of war.
Are you in good health? Do you have any physical ailments I should know about? Beautiful, isn't it? The stone is Gemini. And now you know why it is so highly prized. From this point on, you will enjoy no privilege of rank, no privileges of person. From now on, I will refer to you only as human. You have no other identity.
Well, yeah, that is very, very dark, very, very serious right off the bat. We're dehumanizing him by taking away his name, which seems to be a great start to torture.
Well, I think a big part of this, of torture in general, has to rely on the psychological and emotional turmoil that somebody's put through. Physical pain being a big part of it, and there's certainly a threat to the physical self in this episode. But this idea, not only we're taking away his name, we're taking his rank, his status, his identity. I mean, every single way that he can think of himself, we're going to, Gul Madred basically said, we as Cardassians are going to strip you of this. And in this room, you no longer get to attach yourself to any of these ways you've made meaning before. So it's definitely the psychological aspect of breaking somebody down before he's going to try and build him up in a way that's more productive for him to get information.
Right. And also, in that clip, they actually literally stripped him of his clothes too, which is also, a big thing. The naked self, the naked truth there. So you're really, like you said, you're really breaking them down first before, actually getting into that further information. So,
and listening to the clothes being ripped was definitely, I'm sitting here having a bit of a visceral reaction. And this episode got me to begin with. I think by the end, I was definitely choked up and had a tear. But Patrick Stewart himself, who took this particular script to heart, he really fought to keep this as hard-edged and sort of as deliberate, and he wanted sort of the hard edges to be there. He wanted this to be a disturbing episode. He wanted to point to this. He's a lifelong champion of amnesty, of human rights groups, Patrick Stewart himself. And in that scene in particular, and in future scenes in this episode, he actually filmed them completely naked on a closed set because he wanted that character to be that exposed. And he felt that was going to actually color his performance, to actually be hanged by handcuffs naked, without a sense of identity, without the ability to hide literally or figuratively. I mean, how exposing and how horrific would that be?
Very much so. And I don't even know exactly where to go into this episode, because you and I discussed previously, we're no experts on torture ourselves, and therefore we have some limitations into what we can say. But, it's very... I would say this performance, like you said, he was striving for believability, and this is one of the most realistic feeling episodes. When you watch it, like you said, you get that visceral reaction. You do. You watch his performance, and I'm sure it was hugely aided by, like you said, him actually putting himself into that situation. But all of his responses seem real. They don't feel fake. They don't feel like they were something he tried to do to, just tried to put himself into that sense. You can tell that method acting really helped. And yeah, you start to wonder what life would be like in that situation and how you would react to things like that. And this also ties into cultural things that are happening now in our society with these debates on television and such. And torture is a real thing. I don't know.
Well, what? I mean, 10 years ago, maybe not even 10 years ago, we started having the debate of whether or not waterboarding was torture, and whether or not we as Americans wanted to support torture. And that, to me, I mean, just the fact that we even brought that question, that, we have these tactics, they're so close to torture, we should have a discussion on them. I mean, at that point, I feel like it's already entered the vernacular. It's already part of our culture. We're basically trying to ascribe a positive value to this horrific act.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, it's almost like the collective consciousness is trying to somehow put itself at ease by just talking about it and saying, well, it's not technically torture, so is it torture? Can we keep doing this?
Right.
But there's certain things in the idea of national security, and I think I just want to wrap around quickly to that Stargate Atlantis episode and how we just didn't have the appropriate time to get into that. What they were encountering was, if we torture this one person, which is highly against everything that show's for, they very much are by the book. They're not a torturing group. For them, it was either torture this one scientist who they believed had the information, or let this city explode and have thousands of deaths. So they started to weigh the odds there. And I think that that's easy for people to do, when it comes down to, well, America's under attack, well, we should just start torturing these people that we think are the people that have the information. But I think that's where you get into this very horrifically scary, dangerous thing. And now we have people like Donald Trump on television saying, well, I'd bring back, I support waterboarding and worse. And worse. He said that. I didn't make that up.
Right. And well, yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, and I threw this out at you as we were talking beforehand, but bringing it up again, do we really want to be on the side of Cardassia here? I mean, these are clear villains. They're outlined as people that choose to dehumanize others. And one thing I think is remarkable about that clip we just watched was he references the convention that outlaws torture for, prisoners of war. Right. A clear allusion to the Geneva Convention that we actually have in our reality, and not the futuristic utopia. But basically outlining, and it's a series of treaties basically outlining how we treat prisoners of war. And as this, episode goes on, the Cardassians are meeting with Captain Jellicoe aboard the Enterprise. They basically say, we have Picard. Now, do you want to say that the Federation sent him as an act of war? Therefore, he would be a prisoner of war and eligible for these treaties and this convention. Or do you want to deny that you sent him? Therefore, he's going to be treated as a terrorist. And that was remarkable to me because, I mean, I was a junior in high school. This is 1992. Nirvana and Pearl Jam just broke on the scene. And they're alluding to an argument that's so pertinent to today in 2016, because we do have things like Guantanamo Bay, black ops sites around Europe, different prisons where we have photographic evidence where electrodes were hooked up to genitalia, where people were degraded, where they were covered, in waterboarded. Is one of the less extreme tactics they were actually forced to bear. And here we are basically saying that these treaties that the entire world agrees on, the Geneva Convention, we're not going to torture war criminals. But because they're not war criminals, they're terrorists. Now we have more rights to do these horrific things to them. So it's amazing that this show, I feel like, prognosticated the situation we're in 24 years in advance.
I very much agree with that. And I think, I don't know if this is going off topic or not, but for our more diehard Americans who are for, well, let's face it, for torture, those that see other countries as less superior, and let's be honest, there's very many people in our country that feel that way, especially your Middle Eastern countries. Let's look at Donald Trump as just a person for the moment that says, yeah, let's bring back waterboarding and worse. And for his supporters that say, yes, let's do that. That sounds wonderful because we only care about ourselves. Well, the issue with allowing any sort of torture is that it's great and groovy when it's not done to you. But it tends to be that with a society that supports torture, a lot of other less noble traits follow along, like, being rounded up in the middle of the night while you're sleeping because maybe you're a threat. And as we can clearly see in the post 9/11 world, that is a thing. The Patriot Act and, the recent stuff with the FBI trying to get into iPhones using an act from, 1780 or something like that, the Wright Act. Like these weird loopholes. So for the people that are pro, let's torture away, my word of wisdom to them, as someone who's studied a lot of fascist and Soviet countries and things like that this was commonplace, be careful what you're pushing for, because it doesn't take too long for that to come around to the citizens of said country. Actually, it usually happens at the same time.
Something we did not take a clip of, there's a really powerful scene where Picard sort of has this tunic draped over him and he's slumped in the chair after he's been tortured for quite some time. And Gul Madred brings his daughter in and she has her sort of little pet rodent and they have a conversation and she says, do humans love their children? And he says, no, they don't love them like we do. And she says, will you come read to me before bed? He says, of course. And Picard, points that out. I can't believe you would let her see this. And he says, well, she's been taught for years that humans are the enemy and less than. Basically, she's been taught since she learned to crawl. And he says, if you're able to devalue another race or another group of people, then you have the ability to devalue anyone. And that includes him as a parent. And that really pisses off Gul Madred. I mean, you could see the flash of anger and frustration and fear creeping into him. The thought that his daughter could look at him as less than human, less than a thing, less than something worthy of protecting. And here he realized, I think in that moment, there's a connection for him realizing what he's teaching his daughter, sort of the meta message of everything.
Yeah, and that is, I know we talked about George Orwell's 1984 earlier for a brief moment off air, but that is a theme in that book, too, that the state's doing like a re-education of children, and our main character there, I believe he goes to help the neighbor fix her sink or something like that, and her children are out of control, and the mother has no way of controlling them because the kids spend most of their time at re-education center type of schooling thing. And every fascist country has done this to a degree. You had the little Hitler type stuff, and Stalin did it too. And so George Orwell carried that theory of let's re-educate the kids. And I forget, they had a name for their little, junior fascist gang. And yeah, and it's the same sort of thing. It's that same message that if you start indoctrinating the children to be tormentors, you can't control it. It just snowballs, and I don't know what it turns into in the end. It kind of explodes, I guess, in everyone's faces. And every story ends a little bit differently. But just this idea of bringing the children into this terrible system of abusing others and devaluing others, and it's scary, and it makes me think of all the discussions post-Nazi Germany, where, who do you hold accountable for these acts? Do you hold the whole civilization accountable, I should say the country, or do you hold just the people in power, and do you just hold them accountable? I mean, who gets the blame when an entire country or nation was involved with subjugating races and murdering millions of people?
I think you might have actually stumbled on a point almost accidentally when you said the whole of civilization, because I almost want to say the whole of civilization. Obviously, today we're much more interconnected than ever, and I think information is traded so much more freely now. We're more aware or less able to hide from information. So the idea that these Holocaust type events and genocides, I mean, we're well aware of what's going on in Darfur. We're well aware of what goes on in these war-torn countries. And we know who's gaining financially and in terms of power, we're well aware of this stuff now. So part of me does want to hold all of human civilization to take that to task, I guess, in thinking about who's responsible for this type of thing. I wonder, goes back to sort of, Nazi Germany. People were more aware of these things going on then and still didn't act, which is still a sort of a bloodstain on American and I think a lot of other countries' hands. But I think what's really interesting is this idea of you first have to devalue a person, a race, a group before you can treat them in this manner. He basically has to say, you have no sense of identity. I can't think of you as a name. I can't think of you as a son. I can't think of you as a brother. I can't think of you in any of these ways except as something worthy of my contempt and my ability to destroy, because you are not a Cardassian. You are not a living, breathing, sentient thing, which Star Trek at its best always appreciates sentient life. And I think, there's so many wonderful episodes to point to that. We don't want to cause harm to any sort of life. There's a nod in this episode where Jellicoe says, "Get that fish out of my ready room." Patrick Stewart had petitioned for years to get that fish out of there because he didn't think in that day and age we should subjugate an animal to a cage. And I love that. But that's sort of the ethic and the ethos of which Star Trek lives in, is promoting this freedom for all life and the promotion of those values. And to go the other direction and sort of start looking, even if we think about episodes, looking at Romulans or Klingons as less than, Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, I remember Uhura makes fun of the way Klingons eat, and basically, Kirk calls them an animal. When you're able to do that and you sort of foreclose on what life can be, that's when these horrible things even have an opening within which to happen. That's how Holocausts happen. That's how genocides happen. They don't happen when you have that general appreciation for life.
I agree with that because, again, that is a common thread throughout. We've got the Cardassian Union here. Well, the Soviet Union threw it at the feet of what they called the rich kulaks, landowners. And, that gave them a great excuse to round people up and seize their private property. And, for the Nazis, it was the Jews. And then it just expands. Like you're saying, once you open that doorway, what comes out of it doesn't really seem to have any bounds or limits. It just, as soon as you can peg someone as less than, you can start just taking away rights arbitrarily because why should they have this? And, not just rights, but you can start taking away life because, well, they're less than us. What does that matter? And I don't know.
Right,
sorry, go ahead.
The moment you start to say what life is and what it should be, and it should, ascribe to the Cardassian ethos, or it should be blonde-haired and blue-eyed, when it should be straight, it should be white-skinned, it should be, whatever that should be. Whenever you start to say, this is what this thing should be, and in sort of this literal one-to-one relationship, this is what it means to be alive, this is what it means to be a good human, a good sentient being, that's the moment you sort of create that space then for these evils to happen. Because if you are a red-haired Jew and not blonde and Aryan, or you are gay and you're not straight, when you are any marginalized perspective, anytime, in our culture, you see these memes on Facebook on, every day, we're Americans, we eat too much and we love our guns. And if you don't like it, get out. The moment you try to define what that means to be an American is the moment you're basically saying somebody else is not. And you're creating that space for somebody to be not an American and not of value. And that's what's scary with this whole torture theme in this episode, I think.
I agree with that. Do you want to go ahead and move into our third clip here, which is Picard and the lights that they use? Want to go ahead and do that?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's roll it.
Thirsty? I would imagine so. Well, time to move on.
I told you all that I know.
Yes, I'm sure you have. How many lights do you see there?
I see 4 lights.
No. There are 5. You're quite sure?
There are 4 lights.
Perhaps you're aware of the incision in your chest. While you were under the influence of our drugs, you were implanted with a small device. It's a remarkable invention. By entering commands in this pad, I can produce pain in any part of your body, at various levels of severity. Forgive me. I don't enjoy this, but I must demonstrate. It will make everything clearer. Surprising, isn't it? Most people feel at first they can't steel themselves against it, but they're completely unprepared for the intensity of the pain. That was the lowest possible setting.
I know nothing about Minas Kova.
But I've told you that I believe you. I didn't ask you about Minos Kova. I asked how many lights you see.
He's an amazing actor, the man that plays the Gaul there, and the way he said that. I didn't ask you about Minas Kova. I asked you how many lights you see.
I mean,
Amazing.
Honestly, like even listening to it again, just the audio, I get goosebumps. I mean, his name's David Warner, but he delivers that with such cold calculation that it just absolutely moves me to a place of fear. Like I can't. He should have won an Emmy.
Really, though, I mean, that is a very, very scary. Just everything about it, just terrifying how he delivered those lines. And the part that actually I watched this over twice last night when I was watching this episode again. The part where he explains, he said, well, most people can't steel themselves for the pain and they don't expect its intensity. Like, what a sick and twisted society the Cardassians have become. And we talked about this off air as well, that Star Trek is always proposing these different forms of torture in the future. And I don't think that they're wrong at all, or at all off the mark, for assuming that people are going to continue coming up with these crazy, horrific inventions as we have throughout history. The other one I brought up that comes to mind immediately is Dr. Flux in Enterprise, who creates, in the mirror universe, I should say, comes up with that, it's like a glass cylindrical cell that people are put into. And I think I remember them saying like it stimulates different parts of the brain so they don't even pass out or something like that from the pain. Mm-hmm. And the Cardassian device is extremely similar to that. These people are very serious about causing horrendous pain to their prisoners. This isn't some sort of, it's not even out of necessity. You can tell it goes deeper than that. It's this devaluing and this kind of hatred that they breed for other people.
Yeah, and there's something about, I mean, the writers obviously, I mean, if everything else is progressing and getting more advanced, it would make sense that our means of torturing others. I do believe there's definitely a darkness to the human condition. I don't think everybody, I'm not one of these sort of humanist psychology people that believes we're all oriented toward good and greatness and love. And I think that's something we have to work toward. I think there is something very violent and very aggressive about human nature. And I think there is something even natural, you know, as we talk about torture, you brought it up. What if somebody was going to blow up a city? And what about that threat to you that you feel? Our next clip is going to get into this, but torture, unless somebody's like a true psychopath, or sociopath and really has no empathy and doesn't understand pain, most human beings, I think, would volunteer for vengeance over just hurting somebody out of the blue. So I don't think this torture argument comes out of a vacuum. When, we think about torturing folks that have been rounded up in the Middle East and put in Guantanamo Bay, it is a reaction to September 11th. Now, Is it a just reaction? Obviously not. I mean, Senator McCain who is one of the voices of reason on the subject in Washington, a Republican who I would say more Republicans and more conservatives are more for a stronger defense and a more robust vengeance in our society. At least it seems that way to me. Are less likely to ban torture. But McCain basically comes out and repeats over and over and over again, the information you get from torture is not reliable. And here we have this clip where we say, Picard's like, I don't know anything about Minas Corva. And we realize that's not the point of this torture anymore. The point of this torture is to break this man, to break his humanity. And that's the direction this is going in. And yes, it uses this advanced technology. And it does make sense that as, the laser beams and the spaceships and everything sort of gets more advanced and there's more destructive power to hurt others and to take over whole planets and things of that nature and metagenic weapons that could wipe out all life. The torture and sort of the counter aggression would get higher. But the reality is those two things are, it's a myth that there's correlation there, that this torture is going to actually prevent this harm from happening or that this information is going to be reliable. So even though there is this correlation of everyone gets, you bring a knife, I bring a gun, you bring a gun, I bring a bigger gun, you bring a bigger gun, I bring a tank. That seems to be what's going on. But those two things really aren't even connected. And it's maddening, that dialectic, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not even sure what to add back to that immediately, except what was I just thinking? I was thinking that there's something to be said about these these cultures, these nations, these states that do this type of thing, this torture, and make it so common and prevalent. And I guess we're technically included as that as America. But look at more of the Cardassian Union throughout Star Trek, that they bring this type of fear and they want torture to lead the way. They want to be known as a very, as a culture that should be feared. I mean, if you look, sorry, I'm fast forwarding to DS9, but as you start to see Cardassia Prime, they are that very brainwashed society where they have big telescreen type things out in the streets, and the people clamor around them whenever a Gaul or someone gets on there and says, here's how the battle's going. Well, we're winning. We've won. With the propaganda. And I think another great subject to talk about too would be in DS9, whenever O'Brien is captured by the Cardassians or, imprisoned there, and they do a lot of show trials, which is very, very reminiscent of, the Soviet Union, who often rounded up people and tortured them until they got the answer that they were looking for. So in some cases... No, go ahead.
I'm sorry. But that to me is what's the underlining thing. I love Slavoj Žižek, and he always talks about, and I brought this up before on this podcast, these sublime objects of ideology, and they can be God, they can be the state. And when you have that idea of what the state should be, when you have that idea, and even in the unconscious idea that the state, that's when you go out and look for these answers. And I think what you're alluding to bring it back to Gul Madred, he's looking for Picard to agree with him, even if he knows he's wrong, even if it's not true. He needs to hear the answer he's looking for. Exactly what you said. Like, that's where this torture and this idea becomes such truly a horrifying thing to think about.
Where does that come from? This idea that they need the prisoner to confess? Because from everything that I've studied of the Soviet Union and how oppressive their prison and penal system is that they would round up prisoners, enemies of the state, people that they wanted as scapegoats primarily, and they would brutalize them, torture them, leave them for years in horrendous conditions, meaning just cells that were exposed to elements and poor, sanitation, etc. All in this idea that they needed them to sign a confession. But in a society where you are run by top-down dictatorship style, what is the difference of having someone sign that confession or have Picard tell you the answer that you are looking to hear? I mean, at the end of the day, it's top down. The citizens don't really get to see these confessions anyway, or how are they going to know or care that that's so-and-so's handwriting? I understand the idea of a show trial where the person's admitting it personally, but if there's not this, and maybe they would have thrown Picard up onto a telescreen. I mean, hell, they probably would have had him get up there and say, I am a traitor. Or not traitor, but I did incur into Cardassian territory, and maybe that's it. But I don't understand what this need is for the top-down governments to get these faulty confessions when you could just lie and no one would know the difference.
We'll see. Well,
does that come down?
I think that's why you like the Romulans better than the Cardassians. We were talking about that off our podcast too. But see, I think that's. I feel like we're really digging into something here, because I love that you said that exact phrase. Like, they're looking for agreement. They're looking to reify their abstract concept of what the state is. They need. I think there is a psychological need when you have something that's sort of this fluid concept of what it means to be a union, to be a Cardassian union, to be the Federation. I mean, we even see this stuff, and Ron Moore takes that angle and runs with it with 31. What's Sloane's? I'm blanking out on DS9.
Wait, what was the question for that? Sloane?
What is Sloane's secret organization that's sort of the CIA of the Federation? Section 31. Section. I couldn't think of the word section. But he really runs with the same idea that there is sort of this underbelly and dark impulse that preserves the Federation in ways the Federation can't preserve itself, which I think sort of that's the other side of our psyche. Part of us wants to go out and live our lives in an exemplary way and say, I'm an American. I help other people. I'm a good person. I live with my freedoms. I'm a good American. Then that darker part is, you're a threat to America. These freedoms that everyone else loves, I have to destroy you, and I will do whatever it takes to preserve the idea of what it means to be an American. And I think when you talk about why is there a need for this, for the top down to want to have somebody agree with them, I think that's the darker side of our human nature.
That was going to be my question. Is that just satisfying a dark need in ourselves to have that agreement? Because it is so easy to forge it. When you already have this person locked in a deep, dark cell that the rest of the country can't access anyway, what's the difference between having that signature or not, especially in a day before video cameras and, video evidence? Why do you need that signature? Well, like you said, I think you summed it up pretty well. From where we stand, that, it probably goes to satisfy a dark craving in the person that's doing it. And clearly the person that's torturing has to be getting satisfaction out of it in a large way. I don't think that's to be debated, because not everyone is a torturer. So these people specialize in it.
Well, but see, this does call into the famous dialectic, the master-slave dialectic. And there's an impossibility about what is actually being satisfied in that relationship of top down. So I'll probably screw this up. Every time there's sort of this binary way of looking at these things, I screw it up. But the master needs the slave to recognize him as the master, right? Mm-hmm. Or else he's not the master. Like, if I don't have anybody as a slave, I'm not a master. I can't be a master if I don't have a slave. The slave then is the one that has the power to define who the master is. But if the slave is the one with the power, he's actually the master, and the master becomes the slave. So the master needs a subjugated will that's still a powerful enough force to recognize him as the master. So power dynamics, the way we look at them in sort of those kind of binary terms, I don't know if this is a limit of language itself or a limit to how we can possibly actually think about power. but nobody ever really gets satisfied in that relationship the way they think they're getting satisfied.
That does make sense to me. And I guess that's, well, you might have done a great job in throwing us into our next clip here. You did a perfect segue. Let's move into clip number 4, if you're okay with that, which is
okay with it.
The story about the eggs.
Most people become ill at the sight of live Taspar. I remember the first time I ate a live Taspar. I was 6 years old and living on the streets of Lacat. There was a band of children, 4, 5, 6 years old, some even smaller, desperately trying to survive. We were thin, scrawny little animals, constantly hungry, always cold. We slept together in doorways like packs of wild gettles for warmth. Once I found a nest. Taspers had mated and built a nest in the eave of a burnt-out building, and I found 3 eggs in it. It was like finding treasure. I cracked one open on the spot and ate it, very much as you just did. I planned to save the other 2. That would keep me alive for another week. Of course, an older boy saw them and wanted them. And he got them. But he had to break my arm to do it.
Must be rewarding to you to repay others for all those years of misery.
What do you mean?
Torture has never been a reliable means of extracting information. It is ultimately self-defeating as a means of control. One wonders that it's still practiced.
I fail to see where this analysis is leading.
Whenever I look at you now, I won't see a powerful Cardassian warrior. I will see a 6-year-old boy who is powerless to protect himself.
Be quiet!
In spite of all you've done to me, I find you a pitiable man.
Picard, stop it, or I will turn this on and leave you in agony all night.
Ah, you call me Picard.
What are the Federation's defense plans for Minos Corva?
There are 4 lights.
There are 5 lights. How many do you see now?
You are 6 years old. Weak and helpless. You cannot hurt me.
How many?
Well, there you go. Like I said, I think you segued perfectly into that clip.
It's left to be. I mean, Picard knows it, and he labels it, and it's so frustrating for Gul Madred. But there's still the enactment has to go on, and I'm sitting here thinking I went to a wonderful conference on trauma last year with a woman that spoke, and she worked in the Tavistock Clinic in England, and she had worked with some of the people that have been the most traumatized. I mean, the IRA bombings, the King's,
Wow.
A subway fire in England, people that are burned over 95% of their body, and veterans that have lost limbs. I mean, the most severely traumatized people end up going to the Tavistock Clinic. And she was talking about sort of in the moment where we can't symbolize something, and when we can't put it into language, when we can't understand what it is we're going through, when we're not able to make sense or make meaning of it, is when things become traumatizing, when they become, sort of, they pierce us, they cut us, they, psychically, but they leave scars, they leave wounds. And she said that sort of one of the ways in which we deal with an inability to make a symbol, to form a symbol, and this goes back to Melanie Klein's work, which I won't bore our audience with, but when we're unable to basically welcome something into our own symbolic economy, we're left with nothing more than an enactment. And then we have to sort of reconstruct what we went through in a similar way to understand ourselves, to understand that thing. We're trying to always make meaning. We're trying to understand that. And you can see that in relationships. If somebody is neglected and they grow up to be an abusive person, where they end up enacting something because they can't understand as a little child how they were neglected and hurt.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah, and what's amazing to me is this dynamic is an impossible situation, like I just said about the master-slave dialectic, but it still can't stop the enactment that Gul Madred has to hurt Picard. And Picard's just gasping in pain. I mean, his performance there just, gives me the shivers. But it just strikes me as it really comes down to that, is this guy's now in a position of power, but he has yet to deal with what it was like to have his arm broken for food he had just found that he thought was going to save him for the next week of his life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how do we make sense as a little kid if you're starving in the street and you find these, and we can't do the visuals on the show, but those eggs are horrific looking with this live creature in there.
Oh yeah.
I'm not sure I could ever get hungry enough to eat one of those.
No, I could not. No.
Yeah.
That was it looked like a little eyeball in a tentacle soup. It was gross.
Like it could grow up to be Cthulhu, basically.
Cthulhu, yeah, it really could.
Yeah, Cthulhu.
It could. But to your point, yeah, and especially in a culture like the Cardassian Union that encourages that brutality, there's something to be said about how if it's enabled, it's going to just continuously grow. And I think that's why some of those treaties and such are so useful and necessary. And I think that immediately, whenever I had heard that Trump news, or whenever I read that headline, his quote about "let's bring back worse," I think I turned to someone and said something along the lines of, well, the reason we ban it is because it's what stops us, or it's what stops, for example, the police from picking us up on the street as, a simple arrest and brutally torturing you in the back of a police station. Because, if we start to say, well, torture's fine, it's okay, let's support it as a country, well, you're kind of, it is kind of an all or nothing. And we've kind of pushed this and brushed it under the carpet or the rug a little bit with the waterboarding and such, and it's very disturbing. I remember saying to that person, that's what could happen next. It is, I'm not a fan of slippery slope arguments, but that is one of them. That is a slippery slope argument that is true. I mean, you can historically look it up. I mean, if you start to allow it, it tends to become the standard. So Go ahead.
If we blur the line between what is and what isn't torture, then we're basically saying that, there is an area of acceptable, negative, terrible behavior that doesn't quite reach torture. When we start to blur that line, we're literally blurring that line. I mean, what's the difference between, then the next time a policeman's just a little extra rough with you, doesn't let you call your lawyer right away, doesn't give you your phone call, doesn't give you your access to counsel. I mean, we have these laws in place and they are agreed upon laws because we are trying to work toward a better, safer place than where we did come from. And the moment we keep reenacting these horrors that maybe were visited upon us, September 11th, horrifically tragic event. Why do we want to respond with more horrific and tragic events? Why wouldn't we want to respond with a way that diffuses that cyclical trauma and that generational trauma?
Right.
What happened to Donald Trump?
Well, that's a great question. That really is.
I mean, something terrible had to happen to Ted Cruz at some point. I mean, it makes me just want to find out what's wrong with these guys. What are they? How are they hurt? How are they wounded? What can we do to help them? And it's until they get their help. I mean, God forbid they're elected. Yeah.
Does that come from? I mean, can it be that someone wasn't so much mistreated, but so privileged that they are, these people are so far away from being tortured that they see these others as prime candidates for it. I mean, clearly, to your point, there's something to be said because many other people could be in similar situations and say, okay, the logical, rational, good for everyone solution is, again, not to torture. And therefore, you might say, well, that is the breaking point where these other people are kind of crazy. But is it possible that they're just so privileged in a way that they don't feel like the people they're torturing are even on their... I mean, are they the ones dehumanizing these others to the point that it is totally acceptable and shouldn't be ashamed? Let's go and torture other people from other countries because they're not us.
Could wealth be a form of trauma?
I don't know.
I almost want to extrapolate. I'm almost trying to like synthesize our points here. And I wonder if that could happen. I wonder if there's some kind of change in what it means to be a human once you have that much wealth. And you know, one of my favorite things I've read of late was Jacques-Alain Millier as the heir apparent to the Lacanian that wouldn't even work, or ways of looking at psychoanalysis. But he said he actually did psychoanalysis for one of these very wealthy billionaires, you know, the kind of guys that, you know, run the IMF and the WTO. And he said there's no analysis to be done. You can't work with them because they have so much money. There's no consequence, and that they truly do not understand consequences. And so, I mean, when you have billions of dollars and you can do whatever you want anytime you want, how does that affect how you treat people? Now, I mean, I would say Trump is probably saying he would torture people because there's a large cross section of Americans that cheer wildly for him when he says that kind of thing.
Right.
And so I think there's probably multiple channels that this is being effective on. But I don't know that you can even go out and rile that crowd up and still see the people we're talking about as human. So, yeah, I think there's probably a number of avenues to explore with his particular brand of insanity.
Yeah, and I think there's something to the idea that people that run the IMF and all of that have this absurd amount of money. There should be, I think, a distinction that people don't realize as much, or they don't seem to articulate it as well. These people have so much money, like you said, billions of dollars, to the point that money is not a concern. And that is not to be confused with people that are living comfortably, because I seem to hear that weird blurred line of conversation of like, no, these people are astronomically on a different plane of existence than us. Like, they do not have, these aren't the people that are going to prison because they might have embezzled money. No, these are people that clearly pretty much embezzle money, and you can see it factually, and there's just literally no consequence for them because they have enough money to make those sort of things go away.
That gentleman I mean, it seemed to me there was such an open and shut case of that maid that was sexually assaulted by that IMF. I can't remember that Frenchman's name at the moment, but it seemed like he was going to go to jail because he sexually assaulted a woman in a hotel, and that completely went away. I mean, I thought it was like a dead to rights case when it first came out, and then it just faded away and nobody said a word about it. And I mean, we can go to the sports ball and talk about, you know, the quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers and his history of sexual assaults. I mean, his bodyguards went around a bar supposedly and had things erased from cell phones, you know, and that totally went away. And he got married and had a kid, and now he's the hero of Pittsburgh. And Kobe Bryant bought his wife a giant diamond ring, and there's no history of him sexually assaulting anyone. And Patrick Kane and evidence bags ended up empty at the person's house, and there's no charges brought. I mean, these professional athletes, you know, nothing ever sticks to them either. Right.
Vic and his horrible animal abuse that you can go and look at pictures that will traumatize you for the rest of your life. But, you know, let's bring him back to the Steelers. It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah,
you know,
he can throw a football, goddammit. He should be welcomed back.
Oh, yeah. And the people, this is, and I bring this up because obviously I'm a dog owner and we both come from Pittsburgh. So what bothers me about that is, and I think his is a great explanation or a great case to look at, because people say, well, he did his time. This is maybe a great, just open-ended question. When you torture an animal, so bringing it right back around to torture, when you torture an animal or anything like that, or a person, Is there an acceptable amount of time? Because in my opinion, there is not. The blemishes that you brought upon yourself from, dissecting and electrocuting and just mauling these animals to such a horrific degree, I don't think there's a way to come back from that. I don't think we as society should welcome people back from that either. And maybe that's closed-minded of me to say, or maybe not even just welcome them back, but for God's sakes, why is he on a football team? Why is he ever in the public spotlight again? Why are these people so easy to forget that? Because if it had been for the people that are yelling, oh, well, he did his time. Well, if he did it to you, if that were you and not a dog, would he have ever done his time? Like, is there ever enough time to make that go away? And maybe I don't even have a point as much as I'm just ranting out of anger.
And I can hear that anger and I can hear that frustration. And I guess I sort of have an ambivalence in that I definitely think I don't like to think that human beings could be thrown away. And I don't like to think that, that there's a line that, that there's no redemption. Like that to me is a scary proposition. But then again, to think, like you said, to have, make the big money and play this game and be in a spotlight, I don't know. I mean, I can't see how it's viewed in any other way as tacit approval of his history. I mean, I want us as a society to say that dogfighting is unequivocally wrong, and anyone associated with it, should not reap the benefits of our lopsided celebratory, of fame and special talent society. That just, rubs me the wrong way. I wish I had an easier answer for you.
Yeah, I think my issue, and I think you kind of helped overcome some of that, is or narrow it down, is my issue there isn't so much that we should never let this person be redeemed, but it's just sickening that we not only, accept the fact that, they did something terrible, they mutilated, blood, etc., not pretty. And maybe it's just because people don't take the time to actually acknowledge how horrific things are. Horrific things don't sound so horrific if you have no real internalization of it. If you don't see it, if you just hear it, if you optionally look away from it. I mean, waterboarding doesn't sound that bad on paper, right. Oh, well, you poured water on them. I take a shower every night. People, that's water on me. Yeah, but that's not the same. And I wonder if people just don't take the time to understand that or internalize it. But again, circling back, it's this idea that it kind of all gets pushed away.
And I think you are really pointing to something beautiful. And I think you're also building a segue, just as I did to a clip. Yes. I think our last clip of the episode, really points to when these things really happen to you, when you experience them. And remember, we're even watching the show on torture. We're watching an image of it. Some people would say when we look at September 11th, what we're watching is an image of September 11th. We weren't in the buildings, for the most part. There were plenty of New Yorkers that witnessed that firsthand, but we all watched it as a TV show, right. As news. And there's something to be said about that. And there's something a little bit easier about processing things from that two-dimensional space of our TV versus having lived them. And I think our last clip of the night will actually show the depth that this affected our lead character here.
Yeah, let's roll this one.
I don't know where to begin. It was...
I read your report.
What I didn't put in the report was that at the end, he gave me a choice between a life of comfort or more torture. All I had to do was to say that I could see 5 lights when in fact there were only 4.
You didn't say it?
No. But I was going to. I would have told him anything. Anything at all. But more than that, I believed that I could see 5 lights.
Oh, sadly, it got cut off there a little bit at the end, but I could see 5 lights. So sadly for us, everyone involved, our captain, in the end, admits that the torture was pretty effective. He genuinely started to believe what he was being told, that he could see 5 lights when in fact there were only 4 there.
And, when I, in my work dealing with, folks that have been traumatized or working with, and even just thinking about what it means to provide trauma-informed care, that places like universities or hospitals or workplaces, for that matter, could possibly have trauma-informed care. I wish people could understand when somebody has been through a traumatic instance, it's not even a consciousness that they would choose to see the world differently because they've been through this experience, but it literally affects what they believe they see. And him saying that, when I first listened to that last night, I watched this episode, a few times in the past 20 years, but watching it again last night, it really brought a tear to my eye just thinking about how this has really impacted him. Not only did he go through this horrific threat to his personal well-being, it altered the way he saw reality.
And this is a man who isn't a novice to this sort of situation either. So I think it even brings it, if you're familiar with Picard, I think it even brings it, and maybe that's why it's more powerful over time, having really internalized this idea that Picard is a very strong-willed person, and to hear that, it affected him that way, it carries a lot of weight with it. And I had to clip that up, or that portion of it. I know that wasn't on our original plan, but when I listened to it again, I was like, wow, that carries so much weight.
I'm so glad you did. I don't think I thought about it originally because it did choke me up, and I feel just even emotional listening to it again. But yeah, what a capstone to an absolutely phenomenal script, unbelievable performances, a show that's 24 years ahead of its time, and hopefully, for the love of God, in 24 more years, we can say that we don't need an episode to talk about torture like this, but I don't know. I wish this episode of television was on every TV tonight.
Yes, and that's maybe the advantage to this whole podcast, at least for our own edification here, is to watch these shows that have such strong and powerful messages in them. And I wish more people were watching things like this instead of your MTV reality shows. There's a place for that, but these things that these great story arcs that bring these deep and dangerous conversations to people's the front of their mind, it's just very, very good for people to hear it and to think about it. If we talk about it, we get to a better place, hopefully.
It's at the very least good for me to watch.
Yeah. So with that being said, I have to say I think we had a great conversation on the topic, and we were afraid that we wouldn't have enough to talk about. But was there anything else you wanted to add to it, Joe?
No, it is amazing how these conversations sort of pick up a life of their own, and we might think there's not much life in it, but my God, they sort of pick us up and take us places, huh?
Yeah, you find when you hit that 30-minute mark, you find that you could almost do a 3-hour segment on it. It's like, well, let me just get out my notebook and I'll just, start coming back to this and blah, blah, blah. But that being said, maybe next week we'll have to choose something a little bit more lighthearted. Too bad we don't have a good Doctor Who or something like that on the air still. But after 2 weeks of very, very serious episodes, we might have to pick it up next week with something a little more lighthearted.
I think we're going to go that direction. Take a break from the torture and the death and dying for a minute.
Yeah, but I'm glad we did them back to back. They tied into each other. So on that note, let's just wrap it up here. And I'll say, as always, thanks for joining us for another episode of the How Original Podcast. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes. If you have any feedback for us, send it to howorignalpodcast@gmail.com. Maybe even a little bit more importantly than giving us a 5-star review, if you liked the episode, share it with your friends. Get someone else hooked on it, and you grow our audience for us, damn it.
And arguments are welcome.
Yes.
You don't have to agree with us. We'd love to hear if you disagree.
Yeah, exactly. And we have some great avenues for that as well. We're broadcasting live on Twitch. We moved over here from Mixlr. So you can find us at twitch.tv/Kyle Dempster 7. So that's twitch.tv/Kyle Dempster 7. If you're catching this in a video format, like on YouTube, which this should go up to, there's links or little notations there. What else was I going to say? Oh, sign up for a Twitch account. You'll get notifications when we go live. Send us via email. That's howorignalpodcast@gmail.com. You can send us some of your thoughts on the episode. If you want to add to these discussions, we can always bring that up in retrospect. Also, feel free to suggest us some episodes that you might want us to check out, because, I mean, we're always looking for things like that. Theme ideas, whatever you want to do. So I think that wraps us up for the day. I'm going to play us out. Thanks for joining me, Joe, as always.
Thanks for having me, Kyle.
You are welcome. Or we don't have music. Why is this not playing? What?